And I still sometimes forget. Right, good morning all. We are making rapid progress. I would like today to dedicate this shiur to two things. I'd like to dedicate it to a refuah shalema for Leon, who is still not up to 100% and has not been able to join us yet today. So I'd like to wish him a refuah shalema from all of us. I'd also like to dedicate it to the memory of my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, whose Yortzeit is today, Tzvi Hirsch, who I'm named after, Tzvi Hirsch ben Laser Wolf. He passed away on Rosh Chodesh Av 62 years ago, just over a year before I was born. Hence I was named after him, being Ashkenaz and not Sephardi. So I'd like to dedicate it to his memory. I never got to know him obviously, but his memory will be enhanced, I hope, by our learning. So let's go to page 6, Daf Vav Amud. Where are we? Amud Bet or Amud Aleph? I think we're on Amud Bet, aren't we? Let's go to share the screen and put the text on. Where is it? There it is. Okay, can you see the text, everyone? Yeah, good. Okay, so where were we? Well, we were talking about a dispute between Shmuel and Rav Nachman. We need to go back a bit just to get a little bit of put ourselves in context here. We had this dispute here. Where are we? Chitema pliga Rabbanan alei de Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Right, let me just go from here. So, Gufa Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, Shnayim Shadanu, two judges that judged, Dinehem Din. Their verdict is valid. Ela Shanikra Beit Din Chatzuf. We call them a Chutzpahdik Beit Din. You remember that. But the important bit was not that we called them a Chutzpahdik Beit Din, but that their verdict was valid. That was the point that was important to get out of that statement. Yativ Rav Nachman came along and he said that halacha. Rav Nachman supported Shmuel. Eitvei Rava la Rav Nachman. Rava came along to Rav Nachman and said, wait a minute, this isn't right, because afilu shnayim mezakin or shnayim mechayvin. If we have a situation where two of the judges make him not liable, or two of the judges make him liable, and the other one says, Eini yodea, I don't know, Yosifu hadayanin, we add on more judges. So that shows us the i'etalavu kishnaim danu. That shows us that it can't be that two judges are allowed to judge. Because if it was, we've already got two judges. So the third one that says, I don't know, it's as if he's not there. So if he's not there, we've got two. So why do they have to add on a third one? That proves, says Rava, that you, Rav Nachman, are wrong to support Shmuel, who says that two judges have a valid verdict. Because if it was the case, they wouldn't need to add on a third. Yeah?
Is it not, Johnny, is it not because, excuse me, interrupting.
No,
is it not because he says, I don't know? Is it not because he said guilty as against not guilty, or the other way around?
Yes.
Is there a doubt? Because there's a topic.
He says, I don't know. So it's as if he's not there, right? It's as if he's not there. I don't know. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze 1 sec. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you. So it's as if he's not there. So if he's not there, we have two judges, right? Because two are there and one isn't. right? So the fact that we have to add in a third judge means that those two can't do it on their own. And that is against what Shmuel said. Shmuel said, two people judging on their own, it's a valid judgment. We've now proved that that's not the case at this point. Okay, and then we answered, this is what we did last week.
Yeah.
Then we answered, no, Shani Hatam, it's different over there. Why? Demeikara adata ditlata, TV. In the first instance, they had intended to have a court of three. So they're showing that they're not a chutzpahdik based in. It's not like they've gone and had a two-man based in deliberately. They've been forced upon it because one of them has said, I don't know. Hacha lavadate detla TV. In Shmuel's case, where they're called a chutzpahdik beit din, they intended to have a beit din of less than three in the first place. So the two cases are different. So Shmuel, or more correctly, Rav Nachman, who is supporting Shmuel, will answer Rava and say, you've brought me a proof from a case which is different, and therefore I'm rejecting your proof. Your proof is not a proof at all. Okay, so then we go to the next bit. Eitve. Rava's not finished yet. He raises another objection. And he says the following. He quotes a Braita. Remember, a Braita has power because it's Mishnaic. It's not from a Mishnah, but it is usually Tanaim. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Hadin bishlosha, upshara bishnaim. A judgment can only be done with a court of three, but a compromise can be done with two. And remember, we had this lovely discussion last week about the power of compromise, because the next bit says v'yafeh koach pshara mi koach hadin, and the power of compromise is greater than the power of judgment. Sheshnayim shedanu, two judges that make a judgment, ba'alei dinin yicholin lachzor bahen. The litigants can withdraw their agreement to that judgment because it wasn't done as it should have been with three judges. It was only done with two. However, Shnayim she'asu pshara, a compromise that was reached under the auspices of two judges, ein ba'alei dinin yicholin lachzor bahen. The litigants cannot withdraw from that agreed compromise, showing that the power of compromise is greater than the power of din. But that's not really what we're interested in. What we're really interested in is that the judgment done with two appears not to be binding. And that is the question that Rava is leveling at Rav Nachman, who is supporting Shmuel, who in turn says that a panel of two who does a judgment, it is valid, albeit we called them a chutzpahdik beit din, but it is valid. Rava has now tried to show from a powerful source, from Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel himself, a very powerful source, that Shmuel's opinion is incorrect. And this is where we got to last week. And so we now said, V'chi tema, and you remember right at the end of last week, I explained to you that when it says V'chi tema, it means, and if you're going to say to me, it's preempting a challenge. It's preempting a challenge and say, don't even bother saying this challenge because I'm going to shoot it down before you even say it. V'chi tema. And if you'll say, Pligi Rabbanan alei de Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is not a unanimous opinion. The rabbis disagree with him. Plige means they argue or they have a different opinion. The rabbis have a different opinion to Rabban Shimon Gamliel. If that's what you're going to say to me, and by extension, Shmuel says, well, I go with these Rabbanon that disagree with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. V'ha'ama Rabbi Abahu. But hasn't Rabbi Abahu said, in other words, that's a rhetorical question, V'ha'amor, has he not said? Yes, of course he said, it's a rhetorical question. Rabbi Abahu has said, Shnayim Shedanu, two judges that give a verdict in a case, L'divrei Hakol, according to everybody, Ein dinehem din. Their judgment is not valid. So therefore, don't even go there. Don't try and tell me that there is a dispute between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis on this case, and that Shmuel goes according to the rabbis, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is a different opinion, because we've got another statement from Rabbi Abahu, who says very clearly that there is no dispute. Divrei Hakol. Everybody says, like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that two judges who make a judgment, ein dinehem din. Their judgment is not valid. So
everybody except the judges, Johnny. Everybody knows except the judges.
Well, except these two judges, which is why they're valid. Is that judgment is not valid? They've gone against the judgment. So at this point, Rav Nachman and Shmuel are in a bit of a pickle, because they are in a bit of a corner now, because they have Rabbi Abahu, who has made a statement that says there is no dispute. Everybody agrees, or seemingly everybody agrees, that what you're saying, Rav Nachman and Shmuel, is incorrect. And the answer, remember, this was a vechi tema. And if you'll bring me this suggestion that there is no dispute, my answer will be, Gavra agavra ka ramet. What? You're bringing me a proof of one person against another person. Gavra is a man. From the word gever. Gever is a man. One man against another. In other words, Rabbi Abahu and Shmuel are both Amoraim. So all that I can say to you is that Shmuel disagrees with Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu says there is no dispute between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis, and Shmuel says there is. And are you going to tell me Rabbi Abahu's word is better than Shmuel's? No, you can't, because they're both Amoraim. Actually, it's a bit like lahavdil. It's a bit like they're both in the championship. Neither of them are in the Premier League, because the Premier League are the Tanaim from the Mishnah. The Amoraim are second division. They are the championship. Shmuel, as it so happens, is top of the championship, because he was a very early Amora, and there are some that wanted actually to give him the power of a Tana. He didn't actually officially get the power of a Tana, but he was top of the championship. Rabbi Abahu was still in the championship, but he was much later, and generally speaking, has less authority than Shmuel. So not only is this, can you not bring Rabbi Abahu to, as it were, trump Shmuel? If you wanted to, if you were a Shmuel supporter like Rav Nachman is, Rav Nachman could have come along and said, actually, although they're both Amoraim, everybody knows that Shmuel's opinion holds more water than Rabbi Abahu's. He doesn't say that. What he does say is, well, you can't trump my Amora, which is Shmuel, with your Amora, Rav Nachman. One man against another, it doesn't hold up. And so we are. So we're at the moment where we are is that Shmuel, supported by Rav Nachman, or I suppose Rav Nachman, supported by Shmuel's opinion, holds that a court of two judges, which was incorrectly convened, and does a judgment. That judgment remains valid, but the judges are criticized, heavily criticized. They are called a bet din chatzuf, a cheeky or insolent bet din, and it is to be frowned upon. Whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and according to Rabbi Abahu, everybody else in the Premier League, in the Tanaim's League, agree that their judgment is not valid. So it seems that Shmuel is a little bit out on a limb at this point, but he cannot be trumped, because we don't have Tanaic or Mishnaic proof that everybody agrees that a two-man panel cannot judge a valid judgment. We only have Amoraic opinion, and Shmuel is entitled to a different Amoraic opinion. Okay, everybody happy with that? That's where we got to last week. So we now have in our Steinsaltz Gemarah.
Johnny.
Yes.
Johnny, sorry. I might be getting this all wrong, but didn't we have a case some time ago where two judges, it might have been about them having to pay costs or something, where two judges agreed on a verdict and the litigant and the claimant, or whoever, whatever you call them, sorry, also agreed. And so that verdict was agreed on. Later, the two judges realized that they had made the wrong verdict and they went and asked about it, but it stood. Now,
okay.
Is that a relevant case? Was it something different?
Not only is it relevant, Vivian, it is exactly what we're going to learn now. You remembered it absolutely correctly. It was mentioned earlier on. We are now going to go into that situation in more detail than we did previously. And it is exactly that reasoning that the Gemarah is coming up. So Vivian is now being officially appointed by me as an Amorah, because she has preempted the Gemarah. Either that, or what she has done is what I used to do when I was learning Gemarah, is that I used to have my art scroll Gemarah. I'd read the footnotes, and then I'd raise a question that the footnote raises and pretend it was my question. And the Maggid Shia would think I was really clever, that I'd thought of that question on my own. And I did that for years. Eventually, I got caught out, and the Maggid Shia realized that because I went a bit too far and asked too clever a question that the art scroll Gemarah had asked. So I'm sure that Vivian is not as devious as I was when I was in my younger days, trying to impress the Maggid Shia. In my later years, I didn't really care what the Maggid Shia thought or not, but in those days, I was more interested in them thinking I was clever than actually learning the Gemarah. And Vivian has absolutely preempted the Gemarah that we're on now. So let's get into it.
Excuse me, Johnny, I asked you last week at the end of this year about the litigants when they agree to judges.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to learn that in more detail right now. Okay, thank you. So we've got our little symbol here, which tells us that we're going back into the body of the Gemarah, and we have our little word here, gufa, which means, as I said to you last week, the word guf means body. So gufa. Let's get back to the subject in hand. That's what that means. Ami Rabbi Abahu. This is now re-quoting what we've just summarized above. Amar Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu and Amorah said, Shnaim shadanu dinei mamanot, two judges who sit in judgment on a monetary case, ledivrei hakol, according to everybody, ein dinehen dim. Their judgment is not valid. Eitvei Rabbi Abba le Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abba questioned Rabbi Abahu. Wait a minute, he says, I don't understand. Let me tell you about this case. Dan et hadin. They judged a case. A judgment was given. Okay? Now, have a look at this word, dan et hadin. What do you notice about that word dan? Anyone? I can't, Marcel, I can see your lips moving, but you're muted.
An abbreviation mark, is it?
No. Marcel, what do you say?
There's a small aleph before it.
There's a small aleph before it. Where's that? Where's the small aleph? Oh, in the Gemarah. Oh, yeah. That's taking you over to the Ayin Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. Yeah. Okay, That's taking you to a footnote. Okay, anybody else?
There's an abbreviation mark before the dal of it, Johnny, or am I seeing things?
I can't see an abbreviation. What there's inverted commas in
Oh,
our
inverted comma.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a quote. Okay,
Right.
let me give you a clue. Grammatically, what is that? What is the form of that word?
Judge.
Yes, it means he judged. David Marks, what does it mean?
It's in the singular, and
Correct.
you need more than one judge.
Yeah, it's in the singular, isn't it? Dan et hadin. He judged a judgment. Otherwise, it would be Danu et hadin. They judged. Yeah, Avril, you're doing ulpan, aren't you? So you would know that, of course, that Dan is in the singular. Danu would be in the plural. So Rebbe Abba says he's quoting. The reason it's got those inverted commas, Johnny, is he's quoting from a Mishnah. He's quoting from a Mishnah. Rav Steinsaltz tells us where that Mishnah is, because, of course, you're meant to know that. But he tells us it's in Bechorot. It's in Masechet Bechorot on 28b. And the Mishnah over there says, Dan et hadin. He judged a case. In other words, a single judge judged a case. We know it's a single judge because that word is in the singular, not in the plural. He judged a case. And what happened? V'zika et hachayav. He exonerated the person who was liable to pay. He said that his verdict was that the litigant was not obliged to pay. Or v'chiyev et hazakai. He obliged the litigant to pay when really he should not have been obliged to pay. In other words, he didn't have to pay. In other words, just as both Vivian and Johnny pointed out a few minutes ago, he made a mistake. He issued an incorrect verdict. He obliged somebody to pay when they shouldn't have had to pay, or he didn't oblige somebody to pay when he should have had to pay. Or, this is a different case, Timei et hatahor. He was looking at a case, and this is a monetary case, and he judged that there was some produce that he said was tamei, it was impure, when really he got it wrong and it was pure. Or the other way around. Tiher et atamei. He said that something was pure when it was impure. What's that got to do with monetary cases? Anyone want to suggest a reason why the laws of impurity should have anything to do with monetary cases? Surely that's a question of tahara and tumah. That should go to a different type of bet din. What's it got to do with monetary cases? Any suggestions? Julia, I can see your lips moving, but you're muted.
People were buying it.
I was just wondering if you were going to sell it. That was all. There would be no financial.
People were buying it.
Okay, very good. Yes,
Yeah.
that would certainly do. If you have tamei produce, you can sell it, right? You can sell it. You have to sell it as tamei produce. If you have tahor produce, you can only eat that produce if you are tahor. Okay, so it may be worth more because tahor produce is holy, or it may be worth less because only certain people can eat it. So that's one thing. Secondly, if you made something tamei if you made something tahor when really it was tamei, and then you mixed it with some tahor produce, you're thinking you're mixing tahor with tahor, but really it wasn't tahor. The guy made a mistake. It was tamei. You've just made all the rest of it tamei. So you could end up with a monetary loss. So the laws of Tumah and Tahara are brought here because you're quite right. One way or another, this could lead to a monetary loss for one or other of the litigants. So a judge comes along, a single judge, and he makes a mistake which causes a loss to somebody. What is the halacha? We mentioned earlier on in 3a, and that's what Vivian and Johnny were referring to earlier on, that there are situations where they may have to pay compensation. We also went through a situation, if you remember, that we had this discussion about why appointed judges, expert judges, were free from having to pay compensation. They were indemnified against paying compensation. Otherwise, nobody would become a judge. And if you remember, what we spoke about was the judges who may have to pay compensation were ones who were not appointed as expert judges. If you were like, they were either non-expert judges or lay people who were appointed as judges, either by agreement or what have you. So our Mishnah in Bechorot said, Brisa, sorry. No, it's a Mishnah. Our Mishnah in Bechorot says, Ma she'asa asui. That which he did is done. In other words, you can't retract. You can't retract. It's done. The judgment is given, and that's the end of the matter. However, u'mishalem mi beito. He, the judge, the single judge, again, we've got it in the singular here. Otherwise, it would be meshalmim, wouldn't it, Avril? It would be they have to pay. This is the singular. U'mishalem. He has to pay mi beito, from his house. In other words, from his pocket. Because if it was plural, more than one judge, it would be u'mishalmim mi beitam. It would be plural. This is singular all the way through. So this is telling us the important point here to take from this Mishnah, which is the question of Rabbi Abba against Rabbi Abahu, is that Rabbi Abahu, remember, is the one that has said, everybody says that a bet din of 2, their judgment isn't valid. Rabbi Abba is bringing us a proof that a bet din of 1 has a valid judgment. If he gets it wrong, he has to pay compensation. That's another story. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But the reason that Rabbi Abba has brought this case is to demonstrate that even a court of 1 judge, Masha Asa Asui, that which is done is done. In other words, his judgment remains, and therefore that goes against what Rabbi Abahu said, because Rabbi Abba will say, if a court of 1, his judgment sticks, then we have what's called a kal v'chomer. How much more so a court of 2? We know a court of 3, that's what you're meant to have, because 1,000,000 years ago, we started our Gemarah with the words, Dinei mamonot bishlosha. We are now dealing with a case where the judges forgot to learn our Mishnah and did it with 2, or they did it with 1 for whatever reason. Rabbi Abba says, I've got a proof from a Mishnah that 1, their judgment sticks. So for sure, you're wrong, Rabbi Abahu, that 2, everybody agrees that 2 doesn't stick. So how is Rabbi Abahu going to get out of that? Now, at this point, if we were to end the shiur here in the true Batman style, and we're saying, tune in to see what happens next week, same place, same channel, we would be thinking, Rabbi Abba's got him. How's Rabbi Abahu going to get out of that? Well, we would find out in the next episode that Rabbi Abahu would say to him, Rabbi Abba, not so fast, not so fast. He's got a get out, and here's his get out. And this is a very common way that Amoraim get out of their sticky situations. I can see David Mark smiling here because he's very used to this kind of argument that goes on in the Gemarah. And Rabbi Abahu says, Hacha b'mai askinon. He says, this over here, hacha, over here, b'mai askinon. It's a question, really. What are we dealing with? Hang on a minute, he says. The 2 cases are not comparable. You're bringing me a case which is not comparable. I'm going to get out of this by showing you that your case is not comparable to the one that I was bringing. And in what way is it not comparable? He says, Hocha b'may askinon. This is the case that we're dealing with. De kibluhu alayhu. We're dealing with a case where the litigants accepted from makabel. You can see the word makabel in that word. Kibluhu, kuf bet lamed is the root. Makabel means I accept. They accepted upon themselves the judgment. And in that case, right? In that case, that's why in the case that you brought, Rabbi Abba, your case is where the litigants accepted upon themselves beforehand that they would accept the verdict. And that is what Vivian and Johnny were both referring to before. And Rabbi Abba says, Rabbi Abahu says, that's your case, Rabbi Abba, where the two litigants said before the case, we accept whatever verdict you two judges or you one judge are going to give out, we accept it. And in that case, Masha Asa Asui, in that case, the one that then loses can't turn around and say, but you've only got two judges, you need three. No, you accepted it upon yourself beforehand. Tough. Masha Asa Asui. You want to try and get your money back? Go to the judge. You need to go and claim it off him. Maybe he'll have to pay you back because he made an error. But you can't say the case needs to be retried because there were only two judges. Masha Asa Asui. No, the case, the judgment sticks, and the litigant cannot go and get his money back from the person he had to give it to. He wants to get his money back, he has to go to the judge. Okay. Whereas we're not told this here. Whereas in our case, says Rabbi Abahu, I'm in a case where they didn't agree beforehand. And where they didn't agree beforehand, everybody agrees that a two-man Beit Din doesn't stick. So that's Rabbi Abahu's answer. Good answer, no? Now, so that's like 15 all, right? Rabbi Abbas served, and Rabbi Abahu has batted it back to him. 1 all. Okay. And so Rabbi Abba says, well, hang on a minute. If they accepted it upon themselves, and this is, I think, what Vivian was saying and Johnny was saying, if they accepted upon themselves that they would accept the verdict of the two judges, Amai Meshalem mi beito. Why does he, the judge, have to cough up out of his pocket? We learnt that earlier on. We learnt that if they accept it, they accept it. That's it. Hard luck. And we don't make the judge pay. We learnt that earlier on, didn't we? Sometime around about January in page 3a. So this is Rabbi Abba now batting it back over the net to Rabbi Abahu. And he says, that can't be right because we've got the Mishnah says he has to pay out of his own pocket. So if he had to pay out of his own pocket, it can't be that they accepted the verdict. So your 15 all shot to me actually was out and doesn't count because I've proved that that's not the case. And Rabbi Abahu then says, not so fast, not so fast. There's two different types of cases here. There's one case where they said, we will accept your verdict, Mr. Judge or Mr. Two-Judge panel. We will accept your verdict. Whatever verdict you give, we will accept it. Even if you make a mistake, we'll accept it. We want you to judge our case because we both have confidence in you. Even if you make a mistake, we'll accept it. In that case, you're all correct. He doesn't have to pay from his own household. He doesn't have to pay from his pocket. The judge is indemnified because the litigants have said up front, we indemnify you from any compensation. But, says Rabbi Abahu, there's a different case. Yes, they accepted the two-man panel or even the one-man panel. Granted, they accept it, but what they said over here, de amru le, they said to him, that's plural, that's singular. They said to him, who's saying to who here? The litigants, plural, say to the judge, singular, dayant lan din Torah. Yes, we want you to judge our case, and we have confidence in you, but we want you to judge according to the halacha. Okay, dayant, you must judge, lan, for us, din Torah. You must give us the correct halachic judgment. So, you'd say, well, that's obvious, isn't it? No, not necessarily. Let's say I have a court case against Mr. X, and I go to a judge who I think is a very reasonable fellow, and I think that he will look at my case and think that my case is a good case because I've got a good logical case, and this man I know to have a very good logical brain. Somebody else might go to the judge, let's say my opposition, the person who I'm against, will go to the same judge and say, I'm happy with him to judge my case because I know that he has a very fine grasp of what the halacha is. I'm thinking that he might judge in my favor because he's going to look at my case and he's going to say, you know what? Balaitho, logic. Okay, logic has to apply here. Doesn't matter what the halacha actually is in terms of the bald Shulchan Aruch, if you like. It has to bear logical scrutiny. And my mind tells me that this is not logical, and so I'm going to go with logic. That's what I might think. My opposition might think, this judge knows Shulchan Aruch inside out. I know that my case is good in Shulchan Aruch. I think he's going to come down to the verdict on Shulchan Aruch. So we both go, and we might accept the case. Not necessarily, I won't go along and say, I want you to judge this according to the Shulchan Aruch. I will go and say, I want you to judge this case. I'm happy with you to judge this case, but I won't specify that I want it judging according to the Shulchan Aruch, because I might hope that my logic of my case will persuade the judge otherwise. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that we both litigants think that in Shulchan Aruch we have a good case. I think that my case is correct according to the Shulchan Aruch, and the other guy thinks that his case is. So we both go along and say, we want you to judge, but you have to judge strictly according to the Shulchan Aruch. And I'm saying that because I think I'm right, and he thinks he's saying that because he thinks he's right. So you can see from the two examples that I've given that it's possible that you have two different situations. And that's Rabbi Abahu's get out from Rabbi Abba. He says, two different cases, mate. The case where he has to pay out of his pocket is where they said, we specifically want you to judge according to the correct halacha. And he didn't. He made a mistake. And therefore, because he made a mistake, he's liable. The other case where he doesn't have to pay out of his pocket and therefore I'm correct, is where they don't specify. And then we can go along and say, you never specified. All you said was you wanted me to judge it. You accepted my judgment. I've made a judgment, and therefore I'm indemnified. I don't need to pay. Okay? So Rabbi Abahu has now, at this point, batted back Rabbi Abba's question. Okay, so we're going to just digress a wee bit. Yes, Howard, do you want to say something?
Presumably there are no appeal courts.
Well, no, indeed, presumably that is correct, because what we're going to see shortly is that, maybe not shortly, but we're going to see in due course that if we don't say that the verdict holds, then the case is considered to be a mistrial for whatever reason. There's not enough judges, or one judge says, I don't know, like we said earlier on, and then they have to start all over again. I'm not aware that you can go to an appeal court.
To a higher court.
To a higher court. The reason I'm saying that is that if you go back, I don't know if you were with us back in November. I don't think you were. But what we learned back in November, right at the beginning, was we learnt a whole load of things about which cases were done in front of 3, which cases were done in front of 5, which cases were done in front of 23, and which type of cases were done in front of 71. So if it was
we had that more recently than November. I remember something.
Yeah, we mentioned it again. But that's where we first learnt it, right at the beginning of our Mishnah. Now, it seems to me that if there was an appeal system and that you could go up the court ladder, the higher ladder, then that Mishnah wouldn't be correct. And it wouldn't be that these cases were judged. You'd have to say these cases are initially judged in a court of 3. It may well be, because I have not yet learned the whole of Sanhedrin. I'm only, same as you, on page 6b. I might be a little ahead of you. I'm on page 7a because I have to prepare the Shia. But I haven't yet learned the whole of Sanhedrin. And it may well be that later on in this Masechet Sanhedrin, we learn that there is an appeal system. But to the best of my knowledge, and certainly at this point in our learning, it would seem that your presumption of no appeal court appears to be correct.
Fred, I have one more question, and that is this the law that's applied now if one goes to a Bet Din for a ruling, with Din Torah, or did it fall away at some point? When was it last applied?
Okay, when you go to a Din Torah, I don't know how it works here in Israel, because there is this uneasy relationship between the Bet Din and the Bet Mishpat here in Israel.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm speaking now about Chutz La'aretz, and I would have to defer to somebody who knows that sort of
interaction,
either symbiosis or actually conflict between the two courts here in Israel. But in Chutz La'aretz, it goes like this. If somebody wants to bring a case against somebody else in the Bet Din, then the litigants have to agree to go to that Bet Din. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
That's not the case if somebody brings a case in the court, right? In the county court or the small claims court in England or whatever. If I think that you owe me money, Howard, I might take you to the small claims court or the county court, and you would have to turn up, and you would have never happen. You'd pay me straight away, yeah. But you would have to turn up and put your case. Otherwise, you would have a judgment against you. Now, that's not the case in a Bet Din. You could refuse to go to that Bet Din, and that Bet Din could issue a ruling against you, but it wouldn't be enforceable outside of the Jewish community. Before you just interrupt me, hang on.
Okay.
Let me just finish the process and then ask the question. Similarly, you might say I might say to you, I want you to come to the Manchester Bet Din for me because I think you owe me money. And you might say, I'm not going to the Manchester Bet Din. I know you, Lieberman. You're very thick with those Dayanim in the Manchester Bet Din. I'm not sure I'm going to get a fair hearing in the Manchester Bet Din because you're one of them, aren't you? So yes, I'll go to the Bet Din with you, but I'm not going to that Bet Din. I tell you what, let's go to the Jerusalem Bet Din. And I'm going to say, nah, I don't think so. I know you, Epstein. You're in with a Jerusalem Bet Din. You want to take me to the Jerusalem Bet Din because you think you're going to get a better hearing there. So I'm not going to that. So then what will happen in that scenario, what often happens is that an ad hoc Bet Din is convened. And the way it works is this. Litigant A chooses a Dayan of his choosing. litigant B chooses a dayan, and assuming that those two dayanim agree to sit, the two dayanim between them will choose a third dayan on whom they both agree. Doesn't matter whether litigants agree to them or not. That's irrelevant. Once you've said we're into that scenario, you have, and then before that bet din sits, the two litigants will then agree to abide by the ruling of that bet din. None of that may happen because you may have agreed in the first place to come with me to the Manchester bet din, or I may have agreed with you in the second instance to go to the Jerusalem bet din. But in the absence of agreement on either of those, we are then offered a third scenario. Now, in Chutz La'aretz, if one of us say, you know what, I don't trust any of them dayanim, they're all bent, right? I don't trust any of them. I'll chance my arm in the secular courts. Now, that would be seriously frowned upon in Jewish law. That would be seriously frowned upon in the Jewish community. And in certain communities, if you were to take a Jewish litigant to the secular court before having gone to the bet din and having permission, as it were, from the bet din to do that, you would be severely censured, up to and possibly including being put in cherem, being excommunicated. It has happened in the past that going to the secular courts, certainly back in the day, in the days of the shtetl, if you went outside of the bet din and you went to a secular court with another Jew, that was a very, very serious business, and you could be put in cherem. So that's how it works in Chutz La'aretz. As I said here, there is this uneasy relationship, this interaction between the Batei Din and the Batei Mishpat, and I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable enough to know how it works. If anybody is sufficiently knowledgeable to know how it works, I would be very grateful for that information. Otherwise, I guess I'm going to have to ask somebody before next week.
But Johnny, is this the body of law that a bet din, say in Manchester, would apply?
Yes.
It is today, to this day.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
I mean, they would base their verdicts on not only the Gemarah, the Mishnah, the Gemarah, Shulchan Aruch, but also on all the contemporary, what we would call the Acharonim, the later commentators and contemporary poskim. They would use the whole body of halachic literature. But yes, it would. And I suppose that you would say that Muslim law, Sharia law, or as I think Sharon pointed out, or maybe it was you, Howard, pointed out during a different shiur, that Sharia law is a specific manifestation of Muslim law.
Sharon.
It was Sharon, was it? Well, I've forgotten the other word she used. But anyway, whatever law it is they apply, it would, I assume, apply. They have their own courts in the same way as we have our own Batei Din. And I assume that for them, that their courts would also be similarly binding. And I would imagine that they would similarly be frowned upon if they were to take, one Muslim would take another Muslim to a secular court without going to their courts first, I assume. Okay.
Johnny, in the cases we're doing now,
question
how would they... Sorry.
Johnny first, and then Julia.
In the cases we're doing now, how would they find out that the judge had made a mistake? By going to another court or asking another rabbi or discussing it?
That's a very good question, Johnny. And usually how that works is the guy that loses says, hang on a minute, that isn't right. And he goes to all the books, or he might go to another Dayan, senior Dayan, and say, let me give you a hypothetical situation. And he tells him the case, and the other Dayan, and this happened to me, by the way, not in a bet din court case, but in somebody, I'll tell you the case because it's quite interesting. I foolishly bought a property off a person without doing my due diligence and without looking at the property carefully enough and finding that it was a load of rubbish and had subsidence. Okay. I later found out that it was bought in an auction. I later found out that the seller was an Orthodox Jew who knew that this property was duff, right? He knew that this property was duff. And in English law, caveat emptor, tough luck, buyer beware. In English law, I was stuck with this property. Okay. Somebody said to me, you know what? I know who the seller of this is, and I know that he knew full well that this was a duff property. I'm going to tell you actually a very shocking story. This is a very shocking story I'm going to tell you now. This person said to me, I think you should speak to this person, who happened to be a patient of my practice, by the way. I didn't know who I was buying off at the time. So this person said to me, you should go to this fellow, let's call him Yankee, because that was his name. I'm not going to tell you his surname, obviously. He says, go to Yankee, and you should tell him, you know, you're the buyer, and you should tell him that, you know, halachically, this sale is not a sale, because that is called, and we spoke about it very briefly some months ago, that is called mekach ta'ut, an incorrect sale. He sold something knowing it was not what he cracked it up to be. Okay? He cracked it up to be a house which was fit for purpose, and it wasn't, and he knew it wasn't. So it's as if I have gone into a shop and bought a plate off a plate person, a plate seller, who knows full well that the minute I get it home and put some food on it, it's going to break. Okay? That's called a mekach ta'ut. In halacha, it's not caveat emptor. In halacha, the seller has an obligation to be clean and yashar and straight and give you the information if he knows it. If he doesn't know it, then he doesn't know it. But if he does know it and he knowingly sells you a duff item without telling you that it's duff and without pointing out its faults, that's called a mekach ta'ut in halacha. So this guy said to me, go to Yankee and tell Yankee that you're the buyer and that this is a mekach ta'ut, and halachically he needs to give you his money back, and the sale needs to be invalidated. So here comes the shocking bit. So I go to Yankee and I said, no, I didn't go to Yankee actually. I went to a Dayan in Manchester, and I said to this Dayan, this is the scenario. Is this correct, what this fellow has told me? Does this constitute a mekach ta'ut? Is it correct that this fellow, knowing that it was duff, has sold me a mekach ta'ut? And is it correct that, let's say I was to bring this case before you as a Dayan, or somebody was to bring a case like this before you with a Dayan, would you paskin that this was a mekach ta'ut, or would you say it's not a mekach ta'ut? And this Dayan said, yes, it is, strictly speaking, halachically, it is a mekach ta'ut. Okay, I said, all right, well, so I'm on pretty strong ground here. So I said, do me a favor, because this particular Dayan did owe me a favor or two. I said, do me a favor, will you have a word with Yankee, who you know well, and tell him, this is the scenario, you can tell him that I'm the buyer and that he has done a mekach ta'ut in your Dayanic opinion, and that he should give me my money back and he should put his house back in the auction, and I'll even be generous and pay his auction fees. How about that? So the Dayan said, well, I'm not so sure about that. I said, well, why not? If it's a mekach ta'ut, it's a mekach ta'ut, and therefore he has to give me my money back. And if it's not, well, then I'm stuck with it, and it's my fault. Caveat emptor, it's my own fault. So you just told me that halachically it's a mekach ta'ut. Why won't you do me a favor and go and have a word with Yankee? So he said, well, you know, he didn't really want to get involved, to be honest. But he did it, and he went and spoke to Yankee, and he came back to me, and this is the shocking bit. This is the shocking bit. I had bought the house. I had bought the house in my son's name because it was for him. I had bought it as an investment for him. My son was the rabbi at the time, the junior rabbi, the assistant rabbi of South Manchester Synagogue, of where Jeffrey Glasky, who's up on my right-hand side over there, was a member. He was the assistant rabbi, and he was living in shul property, and he had just got married. And I didn't want him to be in a scenario that my very good friend, who was a rabbi in London, who's my age, had fallen into. And that was the trap of being in shul properties as a tenant in shul properties, all of his sort of first 25 years of his married life, never getting on the property ladder, and never having, when he actually retired and had to go and buy a property, he couldn't buy anything because he couldn't afford it. So I had known about this, and I said to my Dan, I said, you know what? I know you're not going to live in this house, but I'm going to buy you this house. We'll rent it out, but it will be your house, and you'll be on the property ladder, and we'll sell the house when it gets more expensive, and we'll buy another one, and you'll be on the property ladder, even though you won't live in it because you'll be living in shul accommodation. So I bought this house. It was his house. It was no shmuchel, wasn't in his name for tax purposes. It was his house. Now, because he was living in South Manchester, right, which was not a frummy area, right? His address was Fir Tree Avenue or whatever it was called, Bowden, Cheshire. So Yankee was of the, and this is what he told to the Dayan, believe it or not. This is the shocking bit. He said to the Dayan, oh my goodness me, if I'd have known it was Dr. Lieberman, or if I'd have known it was a frum Jew, I wouldn't have sold it to them. But I thought this was Daniel Lieberman, didn't say Rabbi Daniel Lieberman, it just said Daniel Lieberman, Fir Tree Avenue, Bowden, Cheshire. I thought he wasn't a frum Jew, and therefore I sold it to him because, you know, the laws of Mekach Ta'os only apply if we're talking about a Torah Jew. I didn't know that this was a Torah Jew. So that's the shocking bit. It's nothing to do with our situation, but I just thought I'd tell you that shocking story about Yankee. Anyway, let me tell you, so that you don't get upset for me, let me tell you the end of the story. Yankee did not give me my money back, and I was stuck with this Duff property. I had a Polish tenant in this Duff property who, in lieu of rent, put it right and did a very good job. And to cut a very long story short, 10 years later, the area that this had been, by the way, this was my wife's idea to buy this property, not this particular one, but in this area. That property the area that I bought that property had become a very popular area in the 10 years intervening for Hasidim, right? That expanded beyond the boundaries of the current Hasidic area, and it expanded into this, what was previously a very Goyish area. And of course, the value of the property went up like mad, and I sold it 10 years later for a very nice profit, which went for the deposit for my son's house in Australia. So all's well that ends well in the story. But Yankee should not have sold me that property in the first place because it was a Mekach Ta'os. So that was a very long-winded answer to Johnny's question of how you find out that he made a mistake. The judge made a mistake. We find that out because one of the litigants goes to a clever Dayan, goes through all the halachas, and finds out that actually this Dayan, who remember is not an expert, he's a lay judge, he's made the mistake. And so then he goes to the judge and says, oi, you've made a mistake, and this is why you've made a mistake. And he gives him chapter and verse as to why he's made a mistake. So that is how he finds out that he's made a mistake. Okay? Does that answer your question, Johnny? If you'd even remembered the question after such a long answer. Okay, we're going to stop.
You know, the moral of the story, Johnny, is don't do business with Yankees. It's lucky Larry and Sharon aren't here today.
The moral of the story.
We most certainly are here, Howard.
I know.
The moral of the story is don't buy property that you haven't looked at properly in the first place. That's the first moral.
The moral of the story is you never buy a property in auction. Auctions are always used for getting rid of properties that have a problem. Also, I've got loads of comments on what you just said because I've actually got out of various auction contracts in the past. But I'll move on from auctions, which I feel quite strongly about.
Yeah.
My comments about what we've been doing, the Gemarah, I had two questions, please. One is that we've discussed the question of one judge, but not two. And I don't think we've had an example in the past of two judges making a mistake. It was always one judge that made a mistake. So we haven't actually, as far as I can see, but presumably we'll come on to it, got any justification for the two judges.
Okay, let me answer that question before you ask the second question. The answer to that is quite simply, Dinei mamonot bishlosha, our first three words back in November. Monetary cases are judged by three. Makes no difference whether it's two or one. It isn't three. It can be a half a judge, one judge, 1.5 judges, two judges, 2.5, doesn't matter. It's not three, they're the same. Two is the same as one at best, and at worst, you'll say, well, if one is okay, well then for sure two are okay. So, but the bottom line is, if it's less than three, it's no good.
Okay, well, my second point is, you were discussing about whether the litigants were to ask for a case that was to be decided by Torah, and you gave two reasons why somebody would be entitled to compensation if there was a mistake. Then the first time you said specifically there was an indemnity offered. So that the litigant said, go ahead and we will definitely indemnify you if you make a mistake. But you also said that that would apply if the litigants had not specifically asked for the case to be decided on halakha, on the Torah. Which one was correct? Do you need both?
No. They're both correct in and of themselves. So if they say, we want you to judge according to the Torah, but we will indemnify you if you make a mistake, right? Then they're indemnified. If they say, we want you to judge, and then he makes a mistake, which is according to which is a halachic mistake, then one of the litigants can come and say, the litigants can't say, but we asked you to judge according to the Torah. So they're indemnified. Okay? Johnny, you wanted to ask? Can't hear you, Johnny.
You're talking about the Premiership and Championship. When did the Gemarah become a Tana?
It's all about timing. A Tana is at the time of the Mishnah. Anybody who was around and commented on things at the time of the Mishnah, once the Mishnah was written and it started to be discussed by the Gemarah people, you're a championship. You're an Amora. Michael Kraus.
Yeah, hold it. Going back to your case, you were buying a property through a UK auction under UK law. You wouldn't have known that the guy was Orthodox when you bought it until you actually finished buying the property, effectively accepting bidding for it. So the problem is, if you're a frum Jew, it's very risky putting anything in auction, because if you do put it in auction and another Jew happens to buy it, you won't have sold it. but whereas you sell it to a non-Jew, it's not a problem.
That's only the case, Michael, if you're trying to pull a fast one and do a mekach ta'os. Because if it hadn't been a mekach ta'os, in other words, if it had been a perfectly good house, I just didn't like it when I got it, then I wouldn't have any recourse to go to Beis Din and say it's not a proper sale. I only had recourse to go to Beis Din to say it wasn't a proper sale in halakha because he had tried to pull a fast one. And halakha does not allow you to pull a fast one. That's called mekach ta'os.
But hadn't he sold it under UK law as opposed to halakhic UK law?
He can,
UK law, the law of the country takes priority.
Not when you go to a Beis Din. It takes priority. It takes priority if you're talking about criminal matters. It doesn't take priority if somebody comes to you with a monetary claim. And I had a monetary claim against him. I had paid good money for this rubbish house. And my claim was in the Beis Din. Well, I never got that far, of course. But my claim would have been in the Beis Din to him to say, you did a mekach ta'os, you should give me my money back. Because this sale, according to Jewish law, and you are a Jewish person and I'm a Jewish person, and I'm taking you to a Jewish court in the same way that if I lent you the money and you didn't give it me back, I would take you to the Jewish court to get my money back. It's the same thing. You owe me money because you sold me a duff item according to Jewish law. Fully accepted that in English law, he doesn't owe me a penny and I'm an idiot. But in Jewish law, he owes me money. So
even though when you bid for the property, you didn't know the guy was Jewish.
It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he was Jewish. And at the end of the day, it was a Jewish person selling to a Jewish person. He thought he was selling to a non-from Jew. Presumably, he saw the name Lieberman and thought he was Jewish. But the fact that he lived in Bowden, he thought he was not Jewish. So the other moral of the story is that if you're a rabbi, you should put rabbi in your title so that anybody trying to sell you a duff house will know that you're a rabbi and won't sell it you. I say that tongue in cheek, by the way, in case anybody has any doubts about it. Any other points before we call it a day? Okay, it's a good place to stop here because the Gemara is about to digress slightly. And it's going to tell us next week what kind of things they might make mistakes about in the cases that we've discussed here. So last chance for any questions before I stop recording. Otherwise, that's the end of the recording now.